This is the Blaze Radio on demand.
In the next 19 seconds, you could sell your home. Okay, it's not going to sell your home, but you're going to take a big step toward getting it sold. Go to realestateagentsitrust.com and find an agent selected by my team, a professional who shares your values and speaks the truth. Sell your home fast and for the most money. Get moving at realestateagentsitrust.com.
The Buck Sexton Show. You are entering the Blaze Threat Ops Center. This is a secure space. All outside comms are down. Prepare to receive the Buck Brief.
All right, team, we've got Rebecca Heinrichs on the line now. She is a fellow at the Hudson Institute and an expert on national security. Rebecca, great to have you as always.
Always happy to chat.
So tell me what's going on with North Korea. Nuclear test, what is happening? People are freaking out.
Yeah, so North Korea is, it's determined to acquire a delivery system, so a missile that can carry a nuclear warhead. So it's doing two things. It's testing missiles, it's testing nuclear warheads, and it's doing both of them at an increasingly fast pace. It just tested its fifth nuclear explosion. We're not quite sure how successful it was or to the extent how large the explosion was, that kind of thing. That sort of trickles out of the government slowly, if ever. But we know it's supposedly bigger than the last one, which was in January. And they're also testing different kinds of missiles. The most recent one was one off of a sub. And those are really bad because, you can sneak around with a sub and surprise the enemy by launching on them without them being prepared. So they're busy doing both. And so far, the Obama administration and our partners have been unable to slow the North Koreans. And it doesn't look like they're going to anytime soon.
Now, why are the North Koreans doing this? People generally, the usual storyline is, as you see it on all the different sort of news sites, is North Korea acts out as a means of trying to gain leverage. They can get more stuff because we'll say, okay, we'll do less of this and we'll allow more food aid in or whatever the case may be. Other people I hear sometimes say, though, no, they actually do want to be able to launch nukes at people very far away. Which, is it both? Is it more one than the other? What's your take on the motivations behind these sorts of tests for the North Koreans?
Well, the North Koreans, it's probably the hardest regime to try to really wrap your hands around. The leader there is erratic. He doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so if you're trying to understand it from what would the United States do, then you run into all kinds of problems. So, the conventional wisdom is their main priority is just regime survival. They want more food aid. They want to keep the regime in power. They're worried about, the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. They're worried about the United States becoming a closer, more, secure ally with the South Koreans. And so anytime they see the United States doing a military test with the South Koreans, that makes them anxious. The United States is committed to deploying a defensive system in South Korea that could intercept missiles that are headed towards South Korea. That makes them upset. So, they're trying to preserve their own regime, but they do want to have a nuclear capability that they can use to coerce and threaten. We do know that. Whether or not they might actually launch it, it's very difficult to predict the actions of another actor, and it's hard to assess what the psychology there is and what they're estimating is in their own national interest. But they definitely appear to want to have one in order to coerce the United States and other actors to not doing things that they perceive are hostile to their own interests.
Now, what can be done in response, or what should be done in response to this? It seems like in the past, North Korea acts badly. We say, don't do that. There's condemnation. Maybe the UN says some things about how they're being, North Korea is being very naughty. And we know that there's terrible suffering going on inside the country. That doesn't stop. Never mind the oppression, the political oppression, the totalitarianism. That all continues on, too. From the U.S. side of this thing, though, just focusing on how we can try to promote our own security and that of our allies like Japan and South Korea in the region. What should be the response to this?
Well, there's multiple things that we're not doing that we should be doing, and some of it is sort of hard to pin down. The basic problem right now, as I see it, is we have a president who's very weak. He's perceived as very weak internationally, abroad, and so the North Koreans really don't take seriously what our president says. There was just a disastrous meeting in China with our president. The Chinese don't have a whole lot of respect for our president, and we really need the Chinese to cooperate with us on this. The Chinese are the North Koreans' great patron. If the Chinese don't squeeze the North Koreans or get the North Koreans to knock it off, we're going to have a major problem. So every time the UN passes Security Council resolutions, if the Chinese don't enforce them, they're nothing. They don't mean anything. So you need somebody in the White House who people kind of take seriously. When we say don't do this and we draw a line in the sand, then we expect that to be abided by. We want somebody who's going to enforce sanctions, that sort of thing. So I think you have to have some, you got to have some backbone there that we're missing. And then also, you got to pressure China. We got to pressure China to be able to coerce North Korea. And if we can't do that, there's really no way around it. And then, of course, last, I would say, we have got to do what we can to defend ourselves, which means we have to have missile defense systems in place that are reliable enough, robust enough to be able to intercept these missiles if the North Koreans do one of these days decide to pop one off and it is successful and does end up, headed towards the West Coast, which is where it would be headed.
I want to ask you specifically about missile defense, which I know is an area of expertise for you, but I just first wanted to check in on what are the areas of common interest we have with China when it comes to reining in North Korea, and where are the places where our interests sort of diverge?
Yeah, so the Chinese want to keep North Korea contained. They think that the regime there is better than a collapsed regime in which the Korean Peninsula might be reunified. So they see, anytime the United States does something to help South Korea or does something to help Japan, China starts to get worried because they think the United States is sort of inserting itself in its own, what it believes is a sphere of influence in the Pacific region there. And so that's where our interests sort of, conflict. They want to be the dominant power in that region, and so they see the United States, working in the region as a threat. But, the United States wants peace in the region. It wants to get along with China, it wants trade, better trade relations, et cetera. And so it doesn't want conflict, it doesn't want war, and it wants international treaties and expectations abided by, which is why it's got problems with China and what it's doing in the South China Sea, et cetera. It's going to be a matter of what China's got to decide which direction it wants to go in the future, if it wants to have, traditional sort of peace and prosperity and free trade and, peaceful international travel of the seas, that sort of thing, or if it's going to assert itself and demand, sort of regional hegemony, which is what it looks like it's doing.
Now on the missile defense side of things, I think most people would assume that if Kim Jong-un popped off a missile at the U.S., that we could shoot it down. Are we at a point where people should have that level of confidence, or is it still very much we don't know?
So I think so. I think we've got a pretty good system in place. A lot of people, it's really in style right now to beat up on George W. Bush, but he did do some good things. He got the U.S. out of a treaty, the ABM treaty, that prevented the United States from deploying a defensive system. He did that after 9/11, so we got busy at doing that. And so we've got interceptors in Alaska, we've got interceptors in California, and those are there so that if North Korea does pop up a missile, one or two, a few of them, a handful, we do believe that we could hit them out of the sky. But the system needs to be constantly updated. It needs to be tested more, because obviously we haven't actually flung a missile from North Korea in order to test it. In real life, we conduct tests the best we can. And the Obama administration cut funding for it in half its first year in office. And so it had a kind of rough patch there for a while. It's getting back on track, but it needs to be constantly tended to and tested and expanded upon in order to make sure that it's the best it can be.
The administration gets some pretty harsh criticism from former Ambassador Bolton in the New York Post. North Korea's latest nuke test exposes another failed Obama approach. The approach, it seems to me, that John Bolton is decrying here is really just a non-approach or indifference. Is that how you see specifically Obama administration policy towards North Korea, or how would you assess it?
Well, it's hard to figure it out. It definitely looks like it's not doing much. I mean, nobody wants war. You get to the point. Nobody wants war, but you sort of have to have somebody in the White House who you believe would actually go to the point where it could, for instance, take out one of these missiles on their launch pads, if it really deemed that as a necessary thing to protect the United States, to protect our allies. You sort of have to have that in the back of the minds of the North Koreans anytime you engage them. Otherwise, they just won't take you seriously. And so I think that credibility has just been lost in this administration. And, this is real power politics. This isn't, this isn't this wonderful diplomatic academic exercise that the president seems to think is happening in the world. I mean, these are really bad guys, and they have national interests that are very different than what the United States perceives as its own national interests. And so, it just hasn't had a tough approach with the North Koreans, and they really need somebody in the White House who can deal with them and just say enough is enough. We're not going to tolerate, this continued nuclear program, continued missile program, to the point where you've got a dozen nuclear missiles pointed at the United States. We just can't let that happen.
What do you think, Rebecca, just switching gears for a second, of former CI Director Woolsey joining on the Trump campaign as an advisor?
Yeah, I like Woolsey. He and I we've written together before. We've published a couple op-eds, actually on missile defense in the past. I think that he's incredibly knowledgeable about the threats, about what needs to be done. I kind of thought, as Donald Trump's campaign sort of picked up, and as he sort of, grew into himself as a presidential candidate here in the general, that there would be more people with that kind of experience that would lend him a hand and would be willing to, lend him their own credibility. And so I think we might see more of that in the coming months. But Jim Woolsey that's a big pickup for the Trump campaign. Yeah,
I have to say, of the sort of national security names that I've seen attached to the Trump campaign, this is Woolsey's is the one that I'm sort of the most. Oh, well, I mean, he's a very establishment in the sense that he's held a very senior post, and I think was generally well regarded by people who worked with him. So we'll have to see if there'll be some others that now sort of also. I think there's a momentum to these things, right? Once one person sort of breaks the mold, and because the general foreign policy establishment has been very much a Hillary organ for a while now, maybe there'll be some people following Woolsey's footsteps. You think that's likely?
I mean, it's possible. Another thing, too, people, for a while there, it was just sort of conventionalism that Trump didn't stand a chance. And I think as long as that was the reputation, people who have these long years of experience and they have their own reputations to take care of, they were afraid to lend it to somebody like Donald Trump, who just seemed completely out of the mainstream and who was attacking, the people who they worked for in the past, et cetera. And so it was just sort of made everybody nervous and nobody really knew what to do. But I've been reminding people, as more national security establishment people have come out and attacked Trump, and there's lists that are growing about who these people really are. The lists are small compared to the vast number of people who are actually out there. So there's a lot of people who have remained quiet, who haven't said anything yet, or who are quietly leaning or lending their support to Donald Trump privately. And I think you'll see some more now coming out publicly, possibly now that Jim has sort of stuck his neck out there.
Rebecca Heinrichs is a fellow at the Hudson Institute. You can read her latest at hudson.org. Rebecca, we really appreciate you making some time today. Thanks for calling in.
Thanks so much, Buck.
The Buck Sexton Show.
What's up, Team Buck? Have you ever tried a Casper mattress? They are incredible. Casper is an obsessively engineered mattress at an incredibly fair price. It combines springy latex and supportive memory foams to create an award-winning sleep surface with just the right sink and the perfect amount of bounce. Time Magazine named it as one of the best inventions of 2015. You get free shipping and returns to the U.S. and Canada, and you can try it free for 100 nights, risk-free, in your own home. And if you don't love it, they'll pick it up and refund you everything. It's made right here in America. All you have to do is go to Casper.com/buck. That's www.casper.com/buck. You can get $50 towards any mattress purchase by visiting Casper.com/buck. Terms and conditions apply. This is an incredible mattress at a fantastic